Thank you very much. As the chair, I get the privilege of being able to ask a couple of questions before anybody else. And one obvious question, which I think would occur to anybody, is that you worked in FIFA, you served in FIFA yourself since 2011, at a time when several of the people that are now in disgrace and some of the events that are under investigation and some of the characters who are accused of corruption were serving in FIFA undisturbed at that time. So can you give us an idea of what the organisation was like to go into on the inside and what your perception was, and whether you could see corruption going on and understood that there was a great deal wrong inside the organisation?
Well, I came into FIFA and I served there for 4 years on the executive committee. There were, at the same time, other members who were coming in who share sort of my outlook and the ideas that we have. It was a very interesting experience for me, and I could see that there was so much potential that could be done. If we have a new generation and new members coming in who want to progress the sport forward. At the same time, there were many, many challenges. One of the things that really struck me was an environment of secrecy. And that shouldn't be the case. This is the most popular sport in the world, and so everybody should have the right to know what happens within the doors of the governing body. There were many issues that had come up. We had, for example, Mark Pyth and his recommendations about how to reform FIFA, which I supported. I was the first to call, for example, on the Garcia report to be made published, which hasn't happened as of yet.
Garcia report being the investigation into the votes to award the 2018 and 2022 World Cups to Russia and Qatar, which obviously is still under investigation.
Yes, and it's very important to know what happened and what the process was. And that's the only way where we can progress FIFA and also learn from our mistakes and make sure that they don't happen in the future. In terms of development as well, I had my strong opinions, and I was a member of the development committee as a deputy chair for 2 years before I was removed. I like to think because of the strong opinions I had.
Is it worth explaining what your opinions were and the criticisms that you had of the FIFA development programme?
My opinion was that there was not enough being given back to national associations across the world. I think it's a difficult system, and I think that you have to work case by case in every country that you go to, because every country differs from another. And I think that there's a little bit of an isolation when things come from Zurich, as well as the fact that sometimes if people have closer access to leadership in FIFA, then they might get opportunities that others don't know about or don't have the access to. So we need a much more open environment. I think we have to reach out to the world. In other words, to have a real representation from FIFA in every different region, so that we can really get to the bottom of what they need, and regional representation. Because who else knows about their own problems and their own challenges other than the people themselves on the ground? So it's a different way of thinking. And we have to have faith in our members wherever they are.
You've talked about the secrecy and some of the issues with the development programme, but I mean, were you aware as somebody sitting around the table and being involved at FIFA that corruption and alleged corruption on the sort of mountainous scale which is being alleged and some of which has been proven was going on by your colleagues around the table, or some of your colleagues around the table?
I came in at a time when these issues were just being raised, and what had happened before I came in. So I cannot really comment on them, but what I can say is that, obviously there is an issue, because the leadership must have known about issues going on within the organization. And it's very important to take responsibility for what's happening within the organization as a whole. And that was one thing that did strike me.
You thought the leadership must have known about that there was, you said about issues, but they must have known about corruption, do you think?
I mean, I think that's a definite. I mean, if things had been going on, it must have been known. It's not saying that the leadership is to blame, but they must have known that things had happened that were not right and not correct. And that has reflected on the reputation of FIFA across the world.
So do you think that the leadership, which presumably you mean Sepp Blatter, and I don't know if you include his General Secretary Jerome Valk, do you think that they failed, that they must have known that corruption was going on and they failed to deal with it, they failed to address it?
I think that any organization, wherever it is or whatever it is, the leadership must take responsibility if there are major failings within the organization. That's a given. And no matter what you do at this stage, you cannot bring back the reputation of the organization if things happen under your watch. And that's why it is crucial to have a new beginning and a new leadership.
Well, I've indulged myself with a few introductory questions there, which was my privilege, but the format is to open up to questions from the floor. There are journalists here from the press, but Chatham House are very keen for the whole audience and members to participate and ask questions as well. So is there anybody, I know there's one hand up, but are there people who would like to ask first question? I think you had your hand up first, so it's only fair to ask you first.
Thank you very much, Prince Ali. The name's Ewan Grant. I'm a former civil servant who's worked for but not in international organisations since I left. So I've seen very much the overmighty executive issue firsthand. I'm also a long-term shareholder in Royal Bank of Scotland, so I know that as well, the consequences of that. What specific organisational changes would you make or seek to make, and what outside invigilation of those changes would you try to bring in? I'm thinking particularly if it turns out that several of the accused persons, or perhaps future accused persons, aren't in fact convicted, because we all know that it is a very high standard of proof to convict somebody, and frankly often wrongdoing continues because you can't reach that standard of proof. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I think we have to really talk about transparency and implement it. I know it's a slogan right now, but we really need to have it implemented on the ground. I think that anything that has to do with FIFA, when it comes down to salaries, for example, all of that needs to be exposed and needs to be open. There's nothing to hide in that respect. In terms of the executive, I think that obviously they are elected from their confederations, but there needs to be much more encouragement to have maybe term limits for executive committee members, as well as the president of FIFA for sure, so that you can have a lot more fresh ideas, new ideas. I think that they have to be closer to the game. Sometimes you have, for example, executive committee members who are no longer even part of their own national associations, but who have been there for many, many years. So it's a matter of renewal. And also, how they are elected, how they come in. There needs to be a lot more of a vetting process. And I think that also, in order to become a member of the executive, they should really have a platform so that it's not just based upon lobbying behind the scenes, but actually having a real platform for change. At the same time, the leadership in general needs to lead by example. And in FIFA in particular, there's so many different cultures around the world who have different ideas and norms. But if you have a proper leadership, then that example will be set for the rest, be it confederations or national associations. I think the main problem is that there is a fear of change and what that brings. And I think there's so much more potential that can be gained across the world if you have a change of leadership, if you restore confidence to the organization, and you will get much more support, much more sponsorship, for example, because it is the most popular sport in the world. People should be fighting to be a part of FIFA. And when you do that, you have to guarantee that that support goes directly back into our youth, back into development, and back into the game, and for both men and women's football. It's rather simple, actually. But again, it does take a change in mentality, a change in the system, and a change in the leadership.
The gentleman at the back.
Okay.
I think there's a microphone. I think you've got a microphone.
If you were elected, could you please advise what your position would be if corruption was proven in connection with the granting of the 2018 and 2022 World Cups? Would you support them being removed from Russia and Qatar?
I support the rule of law.
But it's worth amplifying, isn't it, that you're on record as being a supporter of the World Cups being in Russia and Qatar, as voted for.
Sure. I think the main issue for me is really how that process took place, why there was a double bid, for example, in the first place. But again, I do believe that every country in the world has the right to host the World Cup, no matter what their size and so on. So in that respect, I do support the World Cups where they are. There are issues that need to be tackled, be it labor laws and so on, and FIFA needs to push to make that change, not be defensive about things. And I think that you will find that the leadership will respond to that. Having said that, these two cases, be it the US investigation or the Swiss investigation, is a legal case. And they're the ones doing it, so we have to see what comes out of that.
So do you not feel that any of the proven facts of how the process happened, like you've said about there being two bids together, which it's pretty safely established led to collusion and vote deals between different voting bodies, different geographical bodies within FIFA, which is strictly speaking against the rules. And also there are stories, for instance, the Sunday Times had many allegations against the Qatari member of the executive committee, Mohammed bin Hammam, and the Qatari bid has said he was not acting on their behalf, but it's well established, the things that he did are well established, and he's now banned from FIFA. Does none of that, for you, disturb the votes themselves? You think that the votes are still valid?
Again, we have to wait to see what comes out of the investigations. You have to base things on facts. And
what's come out so far you don't think is enough to invalidate it?
I don't know. We have to wait to see what does come out, because it is a legal issue. And it needs to be based on that. So, it is for all of us to wait and see what comes out of it. Again, I was not part of that process, so it's difficult for me to comment on something like that. And like anyone, I'm waiting to see what comes out of that.
Any questions? Getting a few more. Don't be shy. Yes, sorry, there's a late one at the front here that I'm going to take, but I'll come to you afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you for your inspiring talk. I was wondering, what is your happiest memory of football?
Well, there are many happy memories. Obviously, first and foremost, having done a lot in terms of we have a development project and working in social responsibility in the sport, which I think is something that we really need to focus on as well, giving back to the communities. And we've done it in Asia, and having looked at what can be achieved, it's not always about the top level of the sport, but helping out, for example, refugees and Syrian refugees in Jordan by utilizing football was a crucial factor for me. We took the kids off the street and got them away from other things, and it really built a sense of community, boys and girls. For example, in Cambodia, where we took young girls who were victims of trafficking, and they became eventually the national team of Cambodia. So there are a lot of things that we can do in terms of social responsibility and giving back to communities. Other than that, it's just loving the game, having seen my young boys and girls come to the top of the level at the moment. Unfortunately, we nearly qualified for the last World Cup, but we had to face Uruguay in the playoff at the end. But our girls are top of our region, and hopefully they will be a great symbol for the future. And working with our players, because at the end of the day, they come from all different backgrounds. And believe it or not, and I guess this is not the right place to say it, but they're much more popular than politicians. So, and that's a beautiful thing to see them rise to that and be real role models for people. And that should be the case across the world.
Yeah, the gentleman at the back there, right next to the microphone.
Thank you. Hussein Ayub, member of Chatham House. Prince Ali, you've gotten a lot of credit for I'd say the elevation and the quality of play back home in Jordan. And in reading your manifesto, it's very interesting when you talk about the virtuous circle, and a very important element there, I think, is money and commercial attributes, because without money going in, probably the entire structure is prone to influence, other influences, and the quality isn't very good, and it's less of an aspirational achievement for anyone to sort of go on that track as opposed to go. So how is, could you talk a little bit about the success that you had and how you see some of the elements of that strategy trickling down into perhaps your strategy around the world for lots of the regions that still suffer from chronic underachievement in football? Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Hussein. I think one of the reasons I did want to take up this challenge is because in Jordan, we are a developing nation in terms of football. We do come from a country that does not have the wealth that others do, and always fighting for funding is a major issue. Regardless, our level of play has gone up to a great degree. If we look at it realistically, I think that Jordan is the least funded football association in our entire region, but we are at a great level regardless. And I've seen this across the world where there is so much potential. And so having that experience and knowing that has helped a lot in terms of looking at how we can really facilitate the needs of the rest of the world. You have different confederations, for example, UEFA. I mean, it's at the level, it's got the funding, it's at a top class level. But FIFA is really the only body that can cover the rest of the world, and therefore it's crucial that we save it, because we need its support as an organization. And again, if done correctly, we can put a lot more into the development of the game. When it comes to national teams, obviously everybody aspires for the ultimate goal to make it to the World Cup, men or women. But if we give the basic needs, at least and the basic ability for people to play the sport, even if you're a small country and you have a star who comes out of you, he himself or herself is an ambassador for your country. And we've seen that many, many times. But again, we have to provide that ability for all. So.
I think you've had your hand up from the beginning, haven't you? So it's only fair to invite you to ask your question.
Thank you. Prince Ali, thank you very much. And I'm sure here in England we can sympathise with meeting Uruguay in recent World Cups. I had a very simple question. My name's Robin Henschel. I'm a member at Chatham House. I wondered how you would contrast your leadership of FIFA with that of Michel Platini, if you get that opportunity.
Well, I wouldn't contrast anything. I have my own ideas, my own ways. I'm bringing something that I believe has not been there before, and that's what I want to achieve. And so it is a new way of thinking. Looking at FIFA as is, I think we can do so much more. And I believe that I've got the energy, the ability, My attitude in life is to work as a team player. I'm going to bring the best people that we can. I'm also open to listening to ideas that come from outside and asking for help. Because I think with FIFA right now, we do need help from outside, from other organizations or other people who can help get us on the right track. So it's a different way of thinking, basically, that I have. I'm my own person, and I have nothing that can tie me back to anything. I have no problems, and I just want to do what's best for the sport. And really, FIFA has to come back to being a service organization. You know, we are not. We should be a non-profit, and we should be there to facilitate the sport. And honestly, when the day comes when nobody actually knows who the FIFA president is, that's the day I know we're in the right shape. So.
And you've been, with Michel Platini obviously being raised, you've been, since you announced your candidacy, since he announced his candidacy, you've been directly critical of Michel Platini, and you've said that he wouldn't be good for FIFA and that he was a protege of Sepp Blatter in the way that he first came into football, and you've talked about needing the era of backroom deals to end. And as I said in the introduction, you've said that you stood down from your own election in the summer because you felt that you were being used as a pawn by others. So what are the issues with Michel Platini?
Again, look, I'm not running against Michel Platini. I'm running for the future of FIFA. That's what I want to say. And I have tremendous respect for Michel Platini and for Dr. Chung, who's done a lot in the past for FIFA. That's not what this is about. And I respect, I mean, he's a legend in football as well.
But did you feel that he was...
But at the same time, you know, I have a different outlook and ideas of how I see FIFA in the future. And that's a right of everyone to have.
I think you said it would be more of the same, and that he's part of that. So do you see him as part of that culture? And do you see, when you were talking about backroom deals, did you mean sort of going round and talking to important people in FIFA to try and get their support for kind of the block vote of support of different associations before he announced he was going to stand? Was that what you were objecting to?
What I want is a real election where any candidate is held accountable to everyone, to the public, to the fans. I think that myself and Mr. Michael van Praag and Luis Figo, who also were challengers in the last election, I think we all felt that we need that proper environment. And I think if we do want a real election coming into things, then that's the way that we have to do it. And that's what I stand for.
Take one from here.
Hi, Dominic Dudley, a member of Chatham House and a freelance journalist. Given the amount of corruption that has been ongoing in FIFA, it strikes me that it might be better just to disband the whole organisation and start from scratch. What makes you so sure that you can fix it and you can root out the corruption, that you or anyone else could do it?
I've heard that from many people, including from Europe in the past. But again, we need to save this organization because it is a world organization, and it is savable and salvageable. But we have to have the right ideas and the right way of doing it, and we have to be given the chance, and that's a very important thing, not just for the president but for the whole system itself. And you can only do that if we have a real proper change, including when it comes to reform. We have some reform going on right now, but again, you know, if they meet once every couple of months, that doesn't work. We need to really work properly right now to have a new leader that can help that process, that can bring a new face, but also to roll up our sleeves, and you know, we should be doing that day in, day out. And I think that's the way to go. But it is a crucial organization for the world, and it would be sad, really sad, if we lose it.
Yeah, I'll take one from the gentleman there. Thank you. I've got no particular order of doing this. I'm just picking out hands at random, so please don't attack me if you don't get a turn by the end, but I'll try to come to everybody.
My name is Richard Sanders, and I'm a member of Chatham House. And I apologise if it appears to be quite a naive question. But last year, in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, FIFA has been held in fairly concern about its governance and so on. There was an awful lot of concern about both the awarding of the World Cups to both Russia and to Qatar. Then there was a substantial amount of concern about corruption in FIFA before the presidential elections came along. So that I think for many of us football supporters, people who were concerned about football and FIFA generally, we were completely shocked that Sepp Blatter could continue to win so much popularity amongst FIFA members. I mean, you will know exactly how many, but 140, 150 votes.
133.
133 against your 7, in other words, 2/3. Despite all the criticism that so many of us have known about FIFA for so many years, they still, and despite the suspicions that people have of Sepp Blatter over the years and the accusations, that he was still able to win such a resounding victory last year. I was shocked. I'm sure a lot of other people were shocked. But I would like to know why did he win so well last time round, from your perspective?
No, thanks. Thank you for that question. Again, it goes back to, in my opinion, the culture. He has been there for many years, which is always an advantage for an incumbent. And also he has an organization behind him in that respect. And if you look at the last election, and I think Luis Figo said it the best, I mean, we went to confederations, and as candidates, we were not even allowed to speak, which is a real shame when you talk about democracy. I mean, if I had candidates out there, I want to ask them what their ideas are, how they can help us, what they want. But that system was not allowed to take place, and that was a real shame. So in that respect, there was not democracy in any way, shape, or form in terms of the election. And I'm really concerned that might become the case again. That's from one aspect. From another aspect, in FIFA, so far, there have never really been challengers who have won. It's always been a sort of succession, and that's what has to change as well. People have to be able to work based on a platform. The other thing is that people from across the world are very reliant on FIFA, and there is always the fear that if there is a change, they might lose some support, and sometimes behind closed doors, there are people who fuel that perception, and they do intimidate and they do scare people. So regardless of how people really feel and what they want, sometimes it really does come back to the basis of being intimidated and being scared of making the change, which really, if even in their heart of hearts, they know is right.
Okay. Take a question from here. She's had a hand up for a long time.
Hi, my name is Denise Rudich. I'm a member of Chatham House. I'm also a strategic advisor on financial crime prevention, working in anti-corruption. You've mentioned a couple of, quite a few nice words that we like to hear in this area: accountability, transparency, change in leadership, which is, I would say, key in being able to tackle the type of widespread, endemic, I think deep-rooted corruption is how the FBI phrased it in the report. You also talked about help and getting help. How closely is FIFA working with other international organizations such as OECD, which is actually one of the leaders in around the world in terms of developing anti-corruption measures, and also organizations such as Interpol or Europol, which I know you guys have previously worked with in the past, more around match fixing, as opposed to changing your internal corporate culture and environment and frameworks. And if you were elected, what percentage of your budget would you think about committing to actually creating an overhaul of your anti-bribery and corruption framework?
Yeah, we would definitely ask for help, and anybody who's interested to help would be welcomed. One of the problems is when, as I've seen with FIFA, when you do get outside help, it does come with some legal clauses, not to speak about what's happening within the organization or what have you. So there's a contract there. And also a lot of them, as is the case right now with the Reform Task Force, are employed by FIFA. So sometimes that can cause a little bit of confusion in a way, but we do need outside help, and I would definitely seek it. At the same time, you know, we can do a lot within ourselves, and if we make ourselves public and known, then I think a lot of people will be satisfied about how things go. Also, you know, in the day and age that we live, there are no secrets, and there shouldn't be. And if you don't put things out on the table, then people will make their own assumptions, and we have to prevent that, and we have to accept criticism. So I think it's also a cultural change, and that's why maybe you need some people who understand the needs and necessities of today and how people view things. And it is a big problem. For myself, for example, my children, I have a 10-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son. And they ask me, they say, you know, why are you involved with this organization when this is what it's about? It's bizarre that it has reached that level. And
what do you tell them? It keeps you busy.
I tell them, look, I'm the one struggling to change it and make it for the better. Because at the end of the day, it is for the whole world. But that perception needs to be changed, and you can only do it through example, through honest work. And again, appreciate it, not through slogans. I really don't say it because of that, but because I really, really mean it.
Thank you. Farhang Matagani. I'm not a Chatham House member, but a member of the Jordanian family, so equally proud of that. I wanted to touch on your comment about wanting to make this a real election. And the gentleman made the point that, you know, the election that happened earlier in the year, although shocking, was in some ways predictable. Mm-hmm. So what's your campaign strategy? I mean, we have a good, 9 months to go over the next several quarters.
It's 9, isn't it?
No, 6 months.
Yes, 5-6 months.
Yes. So what's your campaign strategy over the coming months in terms of making this election more real? Reaching out to the grassroots, somehow getting more influence on the people that voted for Sepp Blatter in the last election that may be more likely to support the incumbents or, let's say, the fabric of existing FIFA leadership.
Sorry, would you mind if I just added to that as well? How can you avoid the same problems with the election as last time, which is what you just said about football associations acting only in their own self-interest in terms of perhaps what development money and programmes are coming their way, which you've said was a problem. It's difficult to see how FIFA has changed that. It seems like the same system is now in place for this election.
Well, first of all, when you talk about candidates, unless you're part of an organization where you have interaction with other confederations, you don't have that access. For example, when there are any meetings or congresses for FIFA or what have you, different confederations are compartmentalized. We don't share with each other. So unless you're actually running for a position, you don't have access to other continents, and that is a big problem. And that's something I want to change. I want to see all the confederations mixed together, share ideas, share their problems, and so on. So you can come up with a better way of running the organization rather than division and pandering to politics or people's personal interests. For myself, obviously it was a big fight because I had to introduce myself to the world within 4 months the last time. And you cannot do that overnight. So this time, I mean, for me, this is a continuation of what I started and what we started. And I want to continue that journey through till February. So I think if that answers it. But it is really, to earn people's trust and people's respect.
Yeah, had your hand up for a long time, so get rewarded with the microphone.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Prince Hussein, for a wonderful talk. Jared Bonnet in London School of Economics. I wanted to shift the focus back to the World Cup for a second, because at the beginning, Mr. Khan talks about.
Thank you.
Thank you. At the beginning, Mr. Khan talks about the soft power of football and how powerful a tool it could be, especially in terms of diplomacy. However, it seems to me that a lot of the issues, and you touched upon some of the issues with the World Cup already in terms of labor, but rather a big issue has been the cost of it. If you look at the past 2 World Cups in South Africa and Brazil, a lot of one could argue that a lot of the issues with their economies now began with the World Cups and the constructions that had gone on with those. So, I know it's a very big question to answer at the moment, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of your ideas about how to make it a little more affordable.
Sure.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much for that. Definitely, it is a big issue. And, that's why I think that even with World Cups, to have the ability to maybe even spread it around the region, if I had, at the time, would have had any advice for Qatar, for example, I would have said that, well, I had said, obviously, that it should have been in winter and you should have bid on that in the first place, which is fine. Technically, South Africa was in the winter, the South African World Cup. But more than that, had it been maybe regional, so if you incorporated the UAE and Bahrain and other countries, it might have been much more feasible and easier to run. The other issue comes with legacy. And with every World Cup, FIFA has a legacy program. But that program begins the day after the World Cup. And we find that, maybe sometimes there's not enough follow-up, it's not done correctly. For me, I'd like the legacy to end on the kickoff of the World Cup itself, so that these countries have accountability in terms of implementing programs that really have benefit after the World Cup ends. And that way you incorporate people into the event itself. And for example, now that we have a World Cup in Qatar, I'd like to see a legacy that helps the whole region, and to start it off right now rather than afterwards. And I think that if people feel that they're really benefiting from it, then you'll have a much different approach to it. At the same time, and in my view, which is equally important, is that it's not just the men's World Cup. We also have the Women's World Cup, which needs a lot more support and attention. I think for football fans, if we look at Canada, we look at Germany before that, it was a real great success. So we need to put a lot more support into that. And also our Youth World Cups. And if you look at how FIFA views it, they view it from a commercial perspective. So there's much more of a burden on host nations for Youth World Cups, because they say, hey, we don't have enough commercial revenue, so therefore you have to bear more of the cost and the funding for it. And you're finding that people are not wanting to host the Youth World Cups. But the reality is, if you want to improve, then you've got to put much more funding and support into it. We have in FIFA a great reserve, and I'd like to see that go back into the youth and into the grassroots, and that way you also not only do to improve the quality of those youth tournaments, but they provide the quality for the future when it eventually becomes the World Cup. Okay. That's why, for example, ourselves, we're hosting the Under-17 Women's World Cup, and we are facing a lot of the similar challenges where the emphasis is on the government providing most of the support when, in fact, FIFA can do a lot more.
Can I just hog the microphone again for what won't be the final question, because we can go until 5 past, but about your own credentials for standing, which I think is a very obvious question to a lot of people, and was commented on when you stood last time, which is obviously you're standing on a platform of the need for democracy in FIFA and for accountability and good governance, but it's noted and has been commented that in your own country there isn't the system of democracy for electing the government, and as far as I understand it, for electing the government, and it's still essentially a ruling family, although I might be oversimplifying. So how do you answer that question and that apparent contradiction?
Well, first of all, yes, we do have a democracy, and we have an elected parliament, and you know, we are going through our own process. But I think Jordan in itself is a real symbol for our entire region, frankly. But if I can talk about myself personally, and when it comes to football and outside of football, I've always been a bit of a somebody who speaks my own mind. I fought for everything from women's rights to freedom of speech. Been very happy to set up, for example, our film commission, which has no censorship, and it is something that brings the voices of people from across our region that we want to bring to the outside. So there are many, many things that I have my own personal view on. When it comes to football, there is no royalty in the sport. There is nothing like that. And I'm very happy that, for example, our Jordan Football Association has the best statutes that there are out there. And we have proper elections. My own inclusion into the sport came at the request of friends and players at the time in 1999, who said, look, you know, why don't you get involved? You love the sport. At the time, I was the average age of our national team players. And you need to get their voices heard. Because sometimes there was a little bit of politics between clubs and so on. But I did it on the condition that I go as the president of the Football Association, not as an honorary president, for example, because I want to get things done, and I want to be held accountable for it.
So there were elections for that?
Yeah, and we have elections all the time. We had an election recently. I'm very happy with that process. At the same time, like I said, we took the locks off our doors, opened our windows, and really engaged everyone. I've taken a lot of criticism over the years through how we do things, but hopefully a lot more support, because if people feel that they're part of it, whether it's the media to companies to your fans, then it's a great environment to work in. And I'm very happy with that. So that's my sort of philosophy and my attitude. And that's what I want to take to FIFA itself.
I'm afraid we've gone over time, haven't we? And do we have to be really strict about that, or can we put everyone in detention?
Yeah, you've been ignoring this side, by the way.
Have I? Yeah. Well, go on. I won't ignore this side if you'd like to ask a question.
Thank you. This is Hiba, an Academy Fellow here at Chatham House. I have 2 questions, just very quick. One about women participation in decision-making in the FIFA Executive Committee. How do you see the potential of that? And the second one, which is very Jordan-specific question. If you get elected, where do you see how do you see yourself managing the crisis management center and like your role as a FIFA president?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Well, maybe I'll start with the second question first. As somebody who works in crisis management, I'd like to take that experience to the organization of FIFA, because I think that's what's needed at the moment. But definitely, if I'm elected, I will dedicate myself completely to FIFA, to the organization, and to youth around the world. That's for the second question. And the first question was?
I was going to say, you've got to remember the first one if you're going to answer the second one first. Women's participation,
women's participation
in the FIFA Exco.
In positions sure. For ourselves, for example, in Jordan, I think we were one of the first national associations who made it part of our statutes to have women representation on the board. We'd like to see a lot more of that in FIFA. Only recently did we have an election for a woman candidate, and we co-opted 2 others. But I think that we should have that. One of the problems, though, that we do face is that to be a member, for example, of the FIFA Executive Committee, you can only have one person representing one country. But with women's football, you do need representation from really the nations right now who are the strongest in women's football, so that they can give a lot more of their experience to the rest of the world. But because of that, if you have, for example, on the FIFA Executive Committee, a member from the United States or Germany or Japan, you're not going to have a female representative from those countries as well. So maybe we need to change that to allow the ability, to get the best experience at that level, as well as have a philosophy regarding women's football. A lot of times, whether it's on club level, on national associations, or even in FIFA, there's this perception that supporting women's football will take away from funding going to men's, and that's completely wrong. The two can work in tandem and so on. We've done it in Jordan, and people are happy with that. So it is really a cultural difference. On the other hand, and what I've seen, honestly, from members on the FIFA Executive Committee and in football in general, is that they work really hard. And any of the women who have managed to break down the cultural barriers and get into positions in FIFA have done so because they worked really hard. And we need that kind of contribution to FIFA. So I'm all for it.
I think on that note, we're going to draw the session to a close. So thank you very much to Prince Ali for his speech and for answering the questions. And thank you all for coming. I've been told to ask you to stay in your seats while we leave. So if you would do that, please, we're going to leave.
Thank you all very much.
After you, Ali.
So I can't say anything.